let's talk about this Atlanta hack. It's not the kind of hack you normally hear about, but we can imagine that pretty much any city anywhere would be just as vulnerable. What exactly happened here?
Yeah, well, what's happened to the city of Atlanta is what's happening to businesses and government organizations for the last several years. They're finding that they haven't taken the necessary steps to be prepared for these types of cyber incidents, and they're having critical services taken offline. They're jeopardizing the data of citizens, of employees, and they're just not knowing how to respond effectively.
So how could they have protected themselves? And is it any different than how a company would protect itself?
Fundamentally, it's not very different. There's a great need in the industry for much more accountability and for action and to be prepared. We find increasingly that in over 95% of the time when organizations suffer these types of events, it's typically some sort of a phishing attack that's at the root cause of it, that basic practices and preemptive measures would have been effective to reversing the damages that they're seeing, but consistently organizations at various sizes, in various industries, at various levels are just not taking the steps necessary. And the technologies that they're relying on are just not offering the types of accountability mechanisms that are required to be effective.
Is there anything particular about Atlanta that made it a more attractive target? I mean, why Atlanta?
Well, today what we find is that the economics of being a bad guy on the internet are just really good business. You can wake up and you can send a few emails and you can hold an entire city hostage for $51,000. And depending on where you are around the world, that can be a pretty significant payday. So there's nothing particularly unique about Atlanta. The consequences, what we're seeing happen to a municipality, they're not specifically varied from what's happening to large organizations around the world. But it does drive the needle a lot closer to us as individuals and the impacts that we're having.
Let's move on to Facebook. And, in addition to, knowledge that this Cambridge Analytica data scandal could have impacted as many as 87 million Facebook users, Facebook at the very same time said that all of its 2 billion plus users could have had their public profiles scraped. Now, of course, it is a public profile, so it's out there, but they could have systematically been taken from the social network. What do you make of that revelation?
Well, I think that's it's really very troubling to learn about this. I think when you use the term public profile, I'm not sure that the users of Facebook felt that the information they were making public, perhaps to their friends or within that platform, was going to be used in all the nefarious ways that it's been used. It's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle, but this really comes down to, as I mentioned before, accountability. What is the responsibility of these firms in protecting our data, and whether or not people are really taking the actions and putting themselves forward to preventing damage. What's troubling about losing this type of information through a social network is that it's often the launching point for much more insidious attacks, and it's not just that there's been a loss of privacy, but it can be used to create lures and phishing campaigns that go after the organizations or the businesses that we're all a part of. And it's just very troubling when organizations aren't being forward with protecting our information.
So you're saying any particular Facebook user right now is more vulnerable to other kinds of attacks because they could have had their public profile scraped from Facebook?
I'm saying that
explain what this means to me, an average Facebook user with a private profile on Facebook, some of which is public facing.
What I'm saying is that every time we lose some insight or some critical piece of authenticity about ourselves, it can be used by others in more nefarious ways that are sometimes unseemingly known to us at the outset. And so I think what's challenging for technology companies today is the posture has been over the last several years, trust us, we're idealistic, we have these important missions, we're bringing people together, but what we find time and time again is that they haven't considered the consequences about their business models and what might become of that information once it gets out into the wild. It's almost impossible to reel that back in now, and so we'll be dealing with those consequences for the near future for some time.